Let's dive into something that's absolutely fundamental to any Linux system, logging. And we're going to focus on the powerful little demon that makes it all happen, rsyslogd. Every single second your Linux system is running, it's writing a story. Think about it. Every login attempt, every little error, every task that kicks off on schedule, it's all being recorded. It creates this incredibly detailed narrative of what's happening under the hood. And that story, it's absolutely crucial for figuring out what went wrong, keeping an eye on performance, and making sure your system is secure. The real trick, though, is knowing how to read it. So who's the storyteller here? Well, in most modern Linux systems, it's this service, rsyslogd. You can think of it as the engine that's constantly listening for all these events, whether they're from the kernel, your apps, or other system services. And then, and this is the important part, it decides what to do with them based on a really powerful set of rules. So how does rsyslogd actually make those decisions? Well, to get that, you've got to understand the two fundamental building blocks of every single log message. All right, let's break this down. First up, every message has what's called a facility, and that's really just a fancy word for the source. Who is sending this message? Is it the kernel, the security system, the cron scheduler? Then, every message also has a priority, and that's exactly what it sounds like. It tells you how severe it is. Are we talking about an emergency that's making the system totally unusable, or is it just a simple FYI message? The key thing to remember is that every single log has both of these parts. Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. It's all about how rsyslogd takes those two building blocks, the facility and the priority, and combines them into a super simple but incredibly effective rule. And here it is. This is the core syntax for pretty much every rule you'll see. It's a simple three-part deal. What kind of message are we looking for? What's its level of importance? And what action should we take when we find one? Simple as that. So the flow here is super logical. A message comes in from somewhere in the system, right? rsyslogd then takes that message and compares it against its list of rules, checking to see if the facility and priority are a match. If it finds a rule that fits, bam! It executes the action for that rule, which most of the time is just writing that message to a specific log file. Okay, so that's the theory. But let's look at a real-world example, something you'd actually find in a standard config file, to see how this all works in practice. So let's just look at the first part of the rule, the filter. What this is telling rsyslogd is, hey, I want you to look for messages coming from two specific places, auth and authpriv. Both of these are all about security and authentication. And that little dot star at the end, that's just a wildcard. It basically means we want messages of any and every priority level, all the way from a simple debug message to a full-blown emergency. And now, let's look at the whole rule. See? After our filter, we have the action, /var/log/auth.log. So what this rule is telling the system, plain and simple, is this. Take every single message that has to do with security, I don't care how severe it is, and write it down in the auth.log file. And that right there is how you get these nice, clean, dedicated log files for specific parts of your system. So let's do a quick recap. The rsyslogd service, it's basically the master organizer for your system story. And it all comes down to that simple but really powerful rule structure: facility, priority, action. Facility is where it's from. Priority is how important it is. And action is what to do with it. That's the core of it. So now you've got the basic grammar to understand the language your Linux system is speaking. Those log files in your var/log directory, they're not just a bunch of cryptic text anymore. They're a story, and it's just waiting for you to read it. The only question is, what's your system trying to tell you?